The air was thick with dust. A storm had descended upon the remote outpost, and the tension was palpable. Lieutenant Andrei Novak felt the vibrations through his boots before the mortar round hit, close enough to rattle the makeshift command post and send debris scattering across the room. Dust choked the air as he pressed against the sandbag wall, the radio crackling with frantic messages. Contact south perimeter, hostile forces breaching the wire, ammunition critical at the north position. The situation was deteriorating fast. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and the nearest backup was still an hour away. A feeling of helplessness hung in the air, but Andrei knew better than to show fear. All units, maintain fire discipline, conserve ammo, air support is on the way, ETA 20 minutes. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but it was the only thing he could offer. The base, once peaceful and isolated, was now a battlefield. With each passing minute, their chances of survival grew slimmer. Sergeant Tomasz Zielinski stumbled in, his face bloodied. "Lieutenant, we've got no more than 200 rounds left. The ammo depot was hit in the first wave." Andrei's mind raced through the options. They were running out of time and choices. He hated the thought of abandoning any of his men, but orders were orders. "Tell the squad leaders to pull ammo from the wounded. Anyone who can't fight gives up their magazines." His voice shook with the weight of the decision, but it was the only choice left. The compound shuddered again as another round exploded nearby. Gunfire echoed from every direction, but Andrei remained focused. His gaze shifted toward Corporal Pyotr Kwiatkowski, who, despite his young face, gripped his rifle tightly, looking like he might snap under the pressure. "Sir, are we going to make it?" Pyotr's voice cracked with fear. Andrei locked eyes with him. He wanted to tell the truth. No, they weren't going to make it. But instead he said, "We hold until dawn. Marines don't quit ground." He checked his own ammo. 3 magazines, 45 bullets between him and whatever came next. A civilian vehicle was approaching the gate, but in the midst of the chaos, it seemed absurd. "Do not engage. Confirm it's not a VBI ID," he ordered over the radio. A vehicle-borne improvised explosive device could end this in a single catastrophic blast. The answer came back. "Negative, sir. It's an old pickup truck, 1 person, exiting the vehicle now." He grabbed his rifle and moved to the west wall, keeping low. What he saw through the haze made no sense. A figure, a woman, moving toward the gate with an eerie calmness. Bullets whizzed past, but she didn't flinch. "Cover her," he ordered, and 2 Marines fired suppressive shots. The woman reached the gate, and Tomasz swung it open just wide enough for her to slip through before slamming it shut again. Andrei finally got a good look at her. She was lean, with dark hair tied back in a tight braid. Her clothes were worn, the jacket faded and stained with old blood. But what caught his attention was the rifle she carried. An antique, a bolt-action rifle that looked like something out of a museum. She walked with the purpose of someone who knew exactly where she was. Andrei's instincts screamed at him to take her to the bunker. But before he could speak, she met his gaze, her eyes unnervingly calm. "I know exactly where I am, Lieutenant." He moved closer, but the woman didn't budge. "Ma'am, this is a combat zone. You need to get to safety." She scanned the compound like a veteran reading a battlefield, ignoring the chaos around her. "I know exactly where I am, Lieutenant," she repeated, her tone unshaken. "And I know exactly what's about to happen to you." Andrei's heart raced. He took a step forward, his instincts screaming that she might be dangerous, a spy, or worse. But she was already moving past him, heading toward the southern wall with the same purposeful stride. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge the chaos around her. She just moved, as if the war itself didn't matter. He followed her, his mind spinning. "Ma'am, what do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. She stopped, glanced at him over her shoulder, and without breaking her stride, replied, "I'm buying you time." She didn't wait for him to respond before crouching behind the sandbag barricade at the southernmost position. She dropped the old rifle to her shoulder with a fluidity that suggested it was an extension of herself, not a tool of war. Andrei felt a chill crawl up his spine as he watched her. He was a seasoned officer, a leader, trained to read every situation, every person. And this woman, this civilian, was as calm in the storm as he had ever been. He had to know more. "Who are you?" he demanded, moving toward her. "Not a threat," she said, not looking at him. "Just someone who's tired of watching people die." The rifle barked once. Andrei's instincts kicked in. He crouched low, moving with urgency as he followed her lead. Through his own rifle's scope, he saw the distant ridge where the enemy had set up heavy weaponry. The figure at the mortar tube staggered and fell. Silence swept over the compound, broken only by the sound of the wind and distant gunfire. No one moved. For a moment, it was as if time itself had frozen. "Did you?" Andrei's voice trailed off as he turned to her. She was already working the bolt, her eyes never leaving the horizon. 620 meters, she said coolly. 7-knot crosswind. Temperature drop. She didn't look at him as she spoke. It was as if she had already forgotten he was there. She reloaded, then glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "You can move now. The enemy will try to flank from the northwest. They won't get past your men, though, if you know what you're doing." He stood frozen for a moment longer, unsure what to do. But her calm demeanor was unshakable, and he knew in that moment that he had to trust her. He relayed the orders. Squad leaders shifted their positions as the woman's words rang in his ears. The minutes ticked by, but the calm in the compound never wavered. Every moment felt like a lifetime. When she spoke again, her voice was low but filled with a sharp certainty. "This isn't just about the battle," she said. "This is about survival. You need to adjust your defenses now, or you'll lose everything. Trust me, Lieutenant." The words seemed to have weight, like the very air in the room shifted with her statement. Andrei felt a pang of doubt, but he nodded. The woman's presence was unsettling, but undeniably effective. She wasn't here by accident. She had a purpose, and it was one he couldn't ignore. He found himself hoping, praying, that she was right. The night wore on, and the compound became an island in the midst of chaos. The men of the squad moved with the precision of trained soldiers, but the air was thick with uncertainty. Eleanor, he learned her name after much back and forth, had done the impossible with a weapon that seemed to belong to a forgotten era. She had taken down the enemy from a distance, beyond the range of most modern weapons, and now they were on alert. The Marines had stopped arguing, stopped questioning her, and were simply following orders. Each one of them, like Andrei, had to admit that she knew something they didn't. But why? Why had she shown up out of nowhere, rifle in hand with tactical advice so eerily accurate? As the last of the night's tension settled into the cold, moonlit silence, Elena sat beside the wall, cleaning the rifle with a meticulousness that matched her previous actions. She was calm, precise, unbothered by the madness around her. Andrei moved closer, cautiously observing her. "You're not just some civilian," he finally said, his voice quieter now. She didn't look up at him as she wiped down the barrel. "No, I'm not," she replied simply. There was no bravado in her tone, no pride, just an acceptance of the situation as if this was where she belonged. "Then why are you here? Why help us?" Elena paused, placing the rag aside. She met his eyes finally, her expression unreadable. "I have my reasons," she said softly. "But it's not just about me. It's about what's happening here." Her voice trailed off, and for a brief moment Andrei saw something deeper in her eyes, a sorrow he had not expected, something personal. Before he could ask more, the radio crackled to life. The voice of Sergeant Zielinski cut through the static. "Lieutenant, we've got movement to the south, small group, but they're setting up something heavy." Andrei's hand instinctively went to his weapon, his training kicking in. "Hold position," he said into the radio. "We're not done yet." The message was clear. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Andrei turned to Eleanor. "Stay close, and stay out of sight." She didn't respond immediately, but he saw her nod. She knew what he was asking. She wasn't a soldier, but she had the instinct of one, something he hadn't expected. They moved together toward the southern barricade, silent and swift. The others were already in position, weapons aimed and ready. The air seemed to vibrate with tension as they all waited for the first move from the enemy. Then, through the low hum of the wind, they heard it. The distinct, low growl of an engine. The enemy was coming. Elena's rifle was at the ready again, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They'll be here soon," she whispered. "Be prepared." Her calm was unnerving, but Andrei had learned to trust it. As the sounds of the enemy's advance grew louder, he had no choice but to follow her lead. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the compound as the first enemy figures began to appear on the ridge. Elena's rifle was steady, her focus absolute. Andrzej felt the weight of her calm, and for the first time in the night, he allowed himself to believe they might just survive this. The sound of boots crunching on gravel and the whir of enemy vehicles grew louder as the first wave approached, and his hand tightened around his weapon. There was no turning back now. The Marines, tense but silent, waited for the signal. Andrzej's eyes flicked between them and Elena. She hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked. The rifle in her hands was an extension of herself, a tool for survival, and she wielded it with the ease of someone who had done this for years. Not a civilian thrown into the middle of a war. A single shot rang out, piercing the stillness, and a figure on the ridge dropped like a rag doll. The Marines gasped in unison. No one had expected such precision, not at this range, not in the dark. Elena didn't flinch. She reloaded, eyes still locked on the enemy positions. "What the hell?" Corporal Piotr Kwiatkowski whispered under his breath, his eyes wide with disbelief. Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The evidence was in front of them. A second shot rang out. Another enemy fell, this time from a different ridge. "They're pinned down," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They'll move soon. You need to be ready." Andrzej's mind raced, processing her words. The enemy would change tactics now. They had to. Elena's predictions were always spot on, and that meant they needed to act fast. "Hold positions," Andrzej barked into the radio. "Prepare to shift defensive lines. They'll move west. Get the heavy weapons in position." The Marines moved swiftly into action, pulling back from their previous posts and setting up at new vantage points. Elena moved with them, staying close to Andrzej, her rifle slung across her back now. "What else do you know?" he asked, his voice low. She looked at him, her eyes colder than he'd ever seen them. "They'll try to break through the northwest corner next. It's the weakest point, but you'll be ready for them." She moved forward, positioning herself near the edge of the wall. Andrzej followed, positioning his own squad with precision. The air was electric with anticipation. As the enemy drew closer, Elena's calm was unshakable. She lifted her rifle to her shoulder again, peering through the sights. Andrzej's heart pounded in his chest. "On your mark," he said quietly. She nodded once, and the world seemed to stop. The crack of her rifle echoed again, louder this time, and then chaos broke loose. The enemy had no chance to react. The first wave was mowed down before they could even raise their weapons. The Marines opened fire, but it wasn't the relentless barrage of desperation that had plagued them earlier. This time, it was calculated, coordinated, a fierce, professional response. As the enemy scattered, Elena worked the bolt on her rifle with smooth, practiced motions. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "The real fight is coming." The first wave was nothing more than a diversion, a prelude to something much worse. Elena's shot had cut down the enemy like a reaper's scythe, but the enemy regrouped faster than anyone had expected. "They're probing our defenses," Elena said, her voice carrying an eerie calm that didn't match the battle around them. She lowered her rifle and stood up, scanning the horizon. "You're going to need more than just firepower now." Andrzej's mind worked furiously. They had barely enough ammo to keep firing, let alone hold off a sustained assault. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't a battle they were going to win through fire alone. They had to outsmart the enemy, use everything they had left. Elena was right. "Piotr, take 2 men and reinforce the northern ridge. Tomasz, get the heavy machine gun up and running. Cover the southeast. We need to make it hard for them to move." The Marines nodded and moved swiftly, their movements sharp, instinctual. They had all grown accustomed to the weight of war, but now it felt different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about holding on to their humanity in the face of something much darker. Andrzej's gaze flicked to Elena, still standing tall amidst the madness. Her calmness wasn't an act. It was a survival mechanism. The way she moved, the way she spoke, it all spoke of someone who had seen war through a different lens. Elena caught his gaze and gave him a slight nod, as if she understood what he was thinking. Then, without another word, she turned and began to move along the perimeter, rifle in hand. Andrzej followed closely behind, his mind racing. "You know what you're doing," he said quietly. Elena didn't respond at first, But then, as she adjusted her grip on the rifle, she looked back at him. "I've had to," she replied simply. "War doesn't leave much room for anything else." The Marines were setting up, taking positions and reinforcing weak spots. Every move they made was deliberate, efficient. Yet despite all the preparation, Andrei couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Elena's prediction rang in his ears. The real fight is coming. She was right. As the first signs of dawn broke over the horizon, the enemy made their move. The ground seemed to tremble with the weight of their assault. A distant roar of engines signaled their advance. Then, like a thunderclap, the enemy's artillery opened up, sending explosions cascading through the air, the sound reverberating across the valley. It was coming. The final assault. The air was thick with smoke and dust, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift with every explosion. "Hold fast!" Andrei shouted over the roar of the battle. "We hold the line!" The words felt hollow even to his own ears. He had no idea how long they could keep holding out. But they would fight to the bitter end if necessary. The first wave of enemy troops appeared on the ridge, their forms silhouetted against the smoke-filled sky. And then, like clockwork, Elena's rifle barked again, and another enemy soldier dropped. The compound was alive with gunfire. The Marines fired in unison, their shots crisp, precise. But this was no longer about survival. It was about holding on to something much deeper: honor, duty, and a sense of justice that transcended the battlefield. The morning light struggled to break through the haze of smoke that clung to the battlefield. The enemy was relentless, pushing forward, but they were met with fierce resistance. Elena's shots rang out, each one finding its mark with chilling precision. But the tide of battle was turning against them. The enemy had massed their forces in the hills, and their artillery continued to rain down on the compound, turning the ground beneath them into a landscape of craters and fire. "They're wearing us down," Tomasz said grimly, adjusting his position behind the barricade. "We can't keep this up much longer." Andrei, his eyes scanning the field, knew Tomasz was right. The compound was taking a beating, and ammunition was running low. But they had one advantage left: the element of surprise. They could hold out, but only if they used the terrain to their advantage. "Pyotr, Tomasz, get ready to shift positions," Andrei ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're going to make them think we're weaker than we are." The plan was simple: lure the enemy into a false sense of security, then strike when they were most vulnerable. Elena, standing beside him, seemed to understand without needing further explanation. "You'll need to move fast," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "Their attack is coming from the northwest, but it's only a matter of time before they shift south." Andrei nodded. The enemy would try to break through the weakest point in their defenses, but they were ready for that. "We need to give them hell when they get close," he said, determination in his voice. The Marines took their positions, waiting for the first sign of the enemy's advance. It came quickly. Through the thick smoke, figures appeared on the ridge, their weapons raised. The enemy charged forward, their formation tight, confident. Elena raised her rifle to her shoulder again, her focus unwavering. "Now," she said, her voice sharp. The sound of her rifle echoed across the compound, followed by the harsh crack of Piotr's and Tomasz's weapons. The enemy scattered, confusion rippling through their ranks. They hadn't expected such precision, not at this distance, not in these conditions. "Good shot," Tomasz muttered, watching the enemy recoil. "But they're not done yet." The enemy regrouped quickly, adjusting their positions. They had learned not to underestimate the Marines. Andrei's mind raced as he watched their movements. It was clear they were preparing for a final push, a coordinated attack designed to break through the line. But they had one last trick up their sleeve. "Get ready for the counterattack," Andrei ordered, his voice steady. "We'll make them pay for every inch." The Marines shifted, moving into their new positions with the precision of well-trained soldiers. Elena, her rifle once again at the ready, stood beside him, unwavering. "They're coming," she said quietly. "And this time, we're not backing down." As the enemy advanced, the Marines opened fire once more, their shots ringing out in a deadly symphony. The final battle was upon them, and they were determined to see it through. The battlefield had become a symphony of chaos. Explosions rained down from the hills, turning the compound into a war zone. The crack of rifles mixed with the deeper thud of mortar fire as the Marines held their ground with every ounce of strength they had left. Elena's rifle barked, each shot finding its mark, but the enemy was relentless. They were closing in. "Stay focused, Marines," Andrei shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of gunfire. "We hold this position at all costs." The words felt heavy in the air, a plea as much as an order. His men were exhausted, their ammunition running low, but they kept fighting. Pyotr, Tomasz, and the others were doing their part, but even they could see that the enemy was slowly gaining the upper hand. Elena, still calm amidst the chaos, moved with purpose, her rifle a constant companion. She had proven herself time and again, but now even she seemed to sense the inevitability of what was coming. "We need to adjust our positions," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "They're pushing from the east. They'll try to flank us." Andrei's eyes scanned the perimeter, his mind racing. Elena was right. The enemy had adapted. They were no longer attacking in one concentrated force. They were spreading out, testing for weaknesses. He cursed under his breath. They had little time left. "Pyotr, Tomasz, take the southern bunker. Hold it at all costs," Andrei ordered, his voice clipped. "The rest of you, we're moving to the north. We make them think we're retreating." The Marines responded immediately, moving with the precision they had practiced in training, but Andrei knew it was a gamble, a desperate one. "Lieutenant," Elena called out, her voice sharp as she scanned the horizon. "If we do this, we're giving up the high ground. It'll make it harder to fall back." Andrei's stomach clenched. She was right, but there was no other choice. "We're not falling back yet," he said firmly. "We're holding this line, but we have to make them believe we're retreating. If they think they've won, they'll make a mistake." The plan was risky, but it was all they had. Elena nodded, adjusting her rifle. "I'll buy you some time," she said. Andrei's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to protest, to keep her safe, but he knew it was useless. She had made up her mind. The enemy was advancing. The time had come. Elena stepped forward, moving toward the northern wall with deliberate calm. She wasn't running, wasn't retreating. She was preparing to strike. Andrei followed, his rifle raised. The next moments would determine everything. If they could hold the enemy back just long enough to turn the tide, they might survive. But in his gut, Andrei felt the cold grip of doubt. The odds were against them. Still, he couldn't afford to think like that. Not now. "Hold the line," he shouted, rallying his men. "We fight here. We fight for this ground." The enemy came into view, their figures slowly emerging from the smoke. The battle for survival had entered its final phase. The ground trembled as the enemy advanced, their assault relentless and calculated. They were getting closer, inching toward the weakened defenses, but Andrei and his Marines weren't backing down. They had made it this far, and they weren't about to give up the ground they'd fought so hard to protect. The sound of gunfire intensified as the Marines unleashed a coordinated barrage, their weapons tearing through the air with deadly precision. But the enemy didn't hesitate. They pressed on, as if the barrage was nothing more than a temporary setback. Elena, standing beside Andrei, didn't flinch as the bullets flew around her. She was the calm at the center of the storm, her rifle never wavering from her shoulder. With each shot, another enemy soldier fell. Her calmness, her certainty, seemed to fuel the Marines around her. But Andrei could see the toll the battle was taking. Pyotr was huddled behind a wall, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his rifle aimed at the advancing enemy. Tomasz, too, was moving swiftly, repositioning their defenses as the enemy closed in. The weight of their exhaustion was beginning to show, but they were still fighting, still holding the line. "They're about to break through," Tomasz shouted, his voice laced with urgency. "We need more time." Andrei's heart pounded in his chest as he looked toward Elena. She didn't look at him. She was already moving, stepping out into the open, her rifle raised. The enemy was closing in from the east, and they didn't even see her. "Elena, no!" Andrei shouted, but she was already gone. The sound of her rifle cracked through the air, and an enemy soldier dropped to the ground, his weapon slipping from his hand. Elena was moving with the fluidity of someone who had spent their entire life on the battlefield, her every move calculated and deliberate. Andrei's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for something deeper. The old rifle in her hands seemed to come alive with each shot, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The sound of gunfire intensified, but this time it wasn't just the enemy's shots. It was the Marines, their weapons joining in unison, firing in a deadly symphony of survival. The enemy's momentum began to falter. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Elena's shots were like hammer blows, each one knocking them back, each one buying more time for the Marines to regroup. The ground shook again, this time with the weight of an explosion. The enemy had launched a grenade, sending debris flying in all directions. Andrzej dove behind a wall, feeling the shockwave through his bones. When the dust cleared, he saw Elena again, moving toward the northern ridge with determination in her eyes. "Stay with me," he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear and frustration. "We can't lose this." She glanced back at him, her face unreadable. "We won't." The final push had come, and Andrzej knew they had only one chance to make it count. The Marines were ready. Elena was ready, and somehow, despite the odds, they were still alive. The battle had reached its crescendo, a violent climax that felt like it could tear the very earth beneath them. The enemy's final push was coming, and the ground was soaked with the sweat and blood of those who had fought for every inch. But there was no time to dwell on losses. Andrzej's focus was razor-sharp. The northern ridge was crucial. If they could hold it, they might just have a chance. The final assault would come from there, and if they didn't stop it, the entire compound would fall. Elena, standing at his side, didn't say a word. She was already positioning herself, adjusting her rifle with practiced ease. Her face was calm, as if she had already accepted what was to come. Andrzej's thoughts swirled. He couldn't let her go out there alone, but he also knew she was their best chance. "We hold this line," he said through gritted teeth, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. "We make them pay for every inch they try to take." The Marines, though battered, nodded grimly. They understood the gravity of the situation. The next few minutes would decide everything. They heard it before they saw it. The low growl of enemy vehicles, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots marching through the rubble. The enemy was here. "Get ready," Andrzej said, his heart pounding. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the final stand. Elena's rifle barked again, a shot that cut through the tension, hitting an enemy soldier square in the chest. The force of the shot sent the man sprawling, but the enemy didn't hesitate. They charged forward, weapons raised, determined to break through. The Marines fired in unison, their shots tearing through the air, finding their marks with precision, but the enemy kept coming, a wave of bodies crashing against their defenses. Andrzej's pulse raced as the battle reached its peak. The northern ridge was within their reach, and the Marines were holding their ground. Elena moved with purpose, her shots slowing the enemy's advance, giving the Marines a chance to regroup. But it wasn't enough. The enemy was too many. The explosion of a grenade sent dirt and shrapnel flying, and for a moment Andrzej thought they had lost. But when the smoke cleared, he saw Elena again, standing tall, rifle in hand. She wasn't giving up. "We're not done yet," she said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the battlefield. "They're going to make one final push. We need to stop them here." Andrzej nodded. "Get to the ridge," he ordered, his voice steady. "We can't let them take it." The Marines moved quickly, reinforcing their positions, but Elena was already ahead of them, leading the charge. She was a force of nature, her rifle swinging smoothly from one target to the next, each shot landing with unrelenting precision. The enemy's assault slowed, faltered, then stopped. They had underestimated the resilience of the Marines and the quiet power of a woman with a rifle. The battlefield was quiet now, the aftermath of the final assault settling over the compound like a heavy blanket. The enemy had retreated, their forces shattered by the Marines' last stand. The victory felt hollow, as if the cost was too great to truly celebrate. Elena stood at the edge of the ridge, her rifle cradled in her arms, her face expressionless. The sun was beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the valley, but there was no peace to be found in the light. The Marines had survived, but at what cost? Their losses were heavy. Andrzej approached Elena, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The weight of the battle was on his shoulders, but he knew it was nothing compared to the weight she carried. "We did it," he said quietly, though the words felt foreign on his tongue. Elena didn't respond. She only looked at him, her eyes filled with something deeper than exhaustion. It was pain, loss, and a quiet resolve. "You don't have to stay," Andrei said, his voice softer now. "The Marines can hold this ground. You've done enough." She turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. "I know," she said, her voice calm but firm, "but I'm not leaving. Not yet." Andrei didn't press the issue. He knew that this wasn't just about survival for Elena, it was about justice, about something far deeper than any battle. He had seen it in her eyes the first time she spoke. The need to finish what had been started, the weight of her father's death, the burden of a legacy that had followed her into this fight was not something she could walk away from. "Then we'll finish it together," Andrei said finally, his voice filled with quiet conviction. Elena nodded, her gaze turning back toward the compound. "One last fight," she murmured, "and then we'll see what's left." They stood there together, watching the smoke rise from the remnants of the battle. The Marines were gathering their wounded, reinforcing their positions, but for Elena the mission was far from over. There were still people to find, still battles to fight, and an enemy that needed to be exposed. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. But for now, Elena had made her choice. The fight was hers to carry, and she would carry it as long as necessary. Abonniere den Kanal, schreib einen Kommentar und teile das Video.